So, if anything, it's kind of your fault that I'm here.
What if the greatest thing Peter Parker ever defeated wasn't the Vulture, Mysterio, or the Green Goblin, but Tony Stark's ego?
What did you just say?
I take that back.
Because buried underneath all the explosions and nanotech, the MCU quietly told a story about a billionaire who spent his entire life building an armor around himself, only for a broke teenager from Queens to dismantle it, piece by piece. Before we even get to Peter, we have to understand what we're dealing with. Tony Stark is not just arrogant. That's too simple. That's the movie poster version. Tony Stark is a man who responded to being kidnapped and held hostage in a cave by building his way out, literally and metaphorically. Most superheroes who survive trauma either shut down or lash out. Tony Stark builds. When he's scared, he builds. When he feels guilty, he builds. When he wants to feel in control, he builds. And look at the people around him before Peter shows up. Pepper Potts? She manages the fallout of his chaos and loves him anyway. She's brilliant, but she needs him to function. That's a dynamic he controls. Rhodey? His best friend wears a suit of armor that Tony built and owns. Think about that. His closest male friendship runs through a machine Tony invented. Bruce Banner? Oh, this one's great. Banner is the one person Tony respects intellectually. So what happens? They lock themselves in a lab and build Ultron together. Steve Rogers tried. God, he really tried. Cap is basically a man who has a moral code so rigid you could build a skyscraper on it. And in theory, that should be exactly what Stark needed. Someone to push back, call him out, hold the line. And Rogers did push back, constantly. The problem? Tony just didn't care. Because here's the thing about arguing with someone whose ego is the size of a small country. If they can write you off as irrelevant, they will. And Tony had the perfect excuse ready every single time Steve opened his mouth.
Big man in a suit of armor. Take that off. What are you?
Genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist.
Rogers combats the ego, but he never dissolves it. You see the pattern? Everyone around Tony either enables him, orbits him, or clashes with him head-on and bounces off. Nobody gets through the armor, until a kid in homemade goggles duct taped to his face starts stopping bike thieves in Queens. When Civil War happens, Tony was in the middle of tearing the Avengers apart. So naturally, he drives to Queens and unilaterally recruits a 14-year-old boy to fly to Germany and fight trained military operatives. Stark, in this moment, is not mentoring Peter Parker. He is deploying an asset. Peter is not a person to Tony yet. He's a resource. A remarkable, exciting, web-slinging resource, but a resource. And Tony was so deep in his own narcissistic logic that he cannot even see the hypocrisy of the man lecturing the world about oversight using a teenager as a pawn. This is where the story really begins. By the time Homecoming rolled around, Tony's trying to become something like a father figure to Peter, but his methodology is deeply flawed and rooted in his own avoidance. He provides Peter with a multi-million-dollar, highly advanced suit, yet, after giving all of this to Parker, Stark communicates almost entirely through intermediaries like Happy Hogan or via remote, Wi-Fi-enabled empty armor avatars.
Thank God this place has Wi-Fi.
Which is the most billionaire form of parenting imaginable, actively avoiding the emotional vulnerability and physical presence required for genuine mentorship. Desperate to prove himself, Peter chooses to handle the incident on the ferry by going solo, and the whole thing goes sideways in the most spectacular fashion possible. Then comes the confrontation. And here, right here, is where the script hands us one of the most psychologically dense exchanges in all the MCU films.
I'm nothing without this suit.
If you're nothing without this suit, then you shouldn't have it.
That's cold. But here's what the movie doesn't tell you directly. Tony is not talking to Peter in that moment. He is talking to himself. He is absolutely 100% talking to himself. This is the man who, after the Battle of New York, found it difficult to sleep, who built dozens of separate Iron Man suits because feeling unarmored made him feel like he was dying, who had a complete identity collapse in Iron Man 3 precisely because he had fused his entire sense of self-worth to a piece of metal. Tony knows what it feels like to be nothing without the suit. It is his deepest, most private terror. And watching this kid he dragged into his world, starting to exhibit the exact same psychological dependency, it broke something open in him. He punishes Peter for being a mirror, and then, in a quiet moment, almost to himself, Tony mutters, "God, I sound like my dad." That line. You could write a whole therapy session about that one line. He defeats the Vulture using nothing but a hoodie and sheer stubbornness. No Stark suit, no tech, just the kid underneath. And Tony, genuinely, truly impressed, extends the ultimate olive branch. A brand new Iron Spider suit, a seat on the Avengers, global recognition, the whole thing. For Tony Stark, this is the highest honor he knows how to give. Fame, technology, elite access. It's literally the life Tony chose when he walked up to a podium and said, "I am Iron Man," to the entire world. And Peter says, no. He says he's not ready. He says he'd rather stay in Queens and look out for the little guy. And for the first time, Stark has to reckon with someone who is simply better than his best offer. That's the moment Peter stops being an asset and becomes a person. A real, autonomous, morally inconvenient person. Tony has no software update for that. In Infinity War, we get a version of Stark that's done and retired. And when the threat he dreaded for 6 years arrives, Tony does what Tony always does. He jokes.
It means get lost, Squidward.
He acts like he's in control, because sarcasm has always been his favorite form of body armor. However, this psychological armor completely evaporates the moment he realizes that Peter has engaged the enemy and subsequently boarded the departing alien Q ship as it breaches the atmosphere. Stark's immediate, unhesitating deployment of the Iron Spider suit to save Peter marks a critical shift in his motivation, because suddenly, this isn't just about Thanos anymore. Watch what happens the second Tony realizes Peter ignored his orders to go back and came anyway. Something changes.
Now I'm here in space.
Yeah, right where I didn't want you to be. This isn't Coney Island, this isn't field trip, this is a one-way ticket.
Now there's a 15-year-old kid standing beside him in deep space, and Tony cannot emotionally survive failing him again as a mentor. That's it. That's the whole thing. A man who spent his entire life building armor around himself, for the first time in his life, is reacting less like Iron Man and more like a father terrified for his kid. Now we get to Titan. And I have to be honest with you. I've watched this scene probably a dozen times for this script, and it still hits the same way every time. When Thanos snaps, most people just fade, quietly, peacefully almost. Not Peter. Because of his spider sense, even though it became more prominent in Far From Home, Peter felt it happening on a cellular level before it became visible. He is terrified. He falls into Tony's arms and he says, "I don't feel so good. I don't want to go. I'm sorry." He apologizes. This 15-year-old boy, fading away in front of him, apologizes to his mentor for dying. Tony Stark, who has survived everything the universe could throw at him, can do nothing. All the money, all the nanotech, all the genius, all of it is completely, catastrophically useless. He is just a man, sitting on a dead planet, holding the ash of a kid he loved. The toxic ego just got dismantled, and what's left, what survives the ash, is something raw and broken and entirely human.
I lost the kid.
5 years later, Tony found peace. The kind of peace you build out of survivor's guilt and deliberate forgetting. Steve shows up and asks for help with time travel. Tony says no. He is done risking what he has left. And then later that night, doing the dishes, doing the most ordinary, domestic, un-Iron Man thing possible, he splashes water on a photo of him and Peter holding a fake Stark internship certificate. And this tiny detail changes everything. Observe that Peter is holding the certificate upside down, and somehow that dumb little detail unlocks the answer. And then he tells his computer, "Run me a time travel simulation. Inverted." The math works. I want you to sit with that for a second. Tony Stark solves time travel, the single most complex problem in human history, because a photograph of a goofy teenage kid holding a certificate the wrong way around reminded him of what he lost. Not duty, not guilt, not the weight of the universe. A kid, his kid, Peter Parker, even as a ghost, even as a memory, reaches further into Tony Stark's defenses than any living person ever managed. The Battle of Earth happens, the portals open, and then Peter, alive, running across the battlefield. Tony Stark, who has spent his entire adult life maintaining emotional distance with surgical precision, who once famously opened a car door just to avoid hugging this exact kid, just grabs him. No words, just holds him. And then Tony makes the snap, and he knows what it costs. The man who built a mechanical heart to keep himself alive in a cave, who engineered a literal machine to sustain his own existence because emotional vulnerability felt more dangerous than shrapnel, chooses to die. Because Peter is alive. Because the future is alive. And Tony Stark finally understands that true heroism isn't living forever to control the world. It's making sure the world has a future after you're gone. He dies saying, "I am Iron Man." Famous, celebrated, mourned by the entire planet. But here's the twist that the whole story has been building toward. Peter Parker's sacrifice, 3 years later, is the exact opposite. To save the multiverse, Peter has to ask Doctor Strange to make the entire world forget he exists. Tony Stark gave up his physical life, but kept his name, his legacy, his place in history. The whole world knows what he did. Peter Parker gives up his name, his girlfriend, his best friend, his mentor, his access to every resource Tony left him, and keeps his physical life, so he can keep being a hero in complete, utter, anonymous silence. One man died famous. One man lives forgotten. The student didn't just surpass the teacher. The student completed what the teacher started. So I would end with this. Tony Stark spent his entire life building armor because he believed that vulnerability was the same thing as weakness, and it took one kid, one completely ordinary, completely extraordinary, completely broke kid from Queens to prove him wrong. Not through argument, not through combat, just through being genuinely, impossibly good. We talk a lot about Tony Stark's sacrifice, and we should. It's one of cinema's great endings. But the quieter story, the story of a boy who dismantled a billionaire's ego with nothing but moral clarity, might actually be the better one. If you enjoyed, you should probably check out How the Russo Brothers Fixed Captain America, because we go even deeper into the MCU's most underrated character arcs. And if you've got a take on the Stark-Parker dynamic I missed, drop it below. Because trust me, somebody always does. Thanks for watching.